You are listening to another AlwaysMoto production. The AlwaysMoto podcast with your host, David Hogan. This show contains information about injuries to riders competing in AMA Supercross, AMA Motocross, MXGP, Oz Pro MX, and other international moto events. The information discussed may be unsettling to some listeners. It might be incomplete or based on medical opinions due to riders tending to hide the details of their injuries. We are here to explain the information and increase injury understanding and visibility for the fans. There might be coarse language and the odd stuff up along the way. If any of this offends you, turn us off right now.
I'd like to remind you that he is not a doctor.
But I am a physiotherapist, and this is a very, very special episode of the AlwaysMoto podcast. This is episode 35. I'm your host, David Hogan. Welcome to the AlwaysMoto podcast. We are in the depths of the clinic, throwing strapping tape anywhere it will stick. As always on the show, we'll be going through all things injuries in moto because #injuries are a part of moto. Now, today's show will not be necessarily our usual format with the emergency department, Dave's diatribe, and all those good parts and whatnot that we usually put on for you guys. This is a very dedicated episode just to our interview with Aldon Baker. As many of you will have seen, we dropped some teasers earlier this weekend, a couple of days ago, to try and get you guys enticed to check out the AlwaysMoto podcast because we felt that this episode warranted your attention. So you should be listening to this episode all the way through. Aldon was an extremely good guest. But let's jump through a couple of things first before we get into the interview with Aldon. We are obviously putting through this show with the support of a few people now, which is fantastic. So let's jump into those couple of people that are supporting the show. We now have Polar Australia on board, which most of you will know who do anything in moto and training, and particularly as you'll hear with Aldon, you need to track your heart rate and all those other good parts that can come along with those multi-purpose fitness training watches nowadays. But Polar Australia is on board and supporting the AlwaysMoto podcast, and they have actually released a brand new fitness and wellbeing watch, the Ignite 3. This is their very best offering to date in this field. It's the lightest watch you'll find at 35 grams. It's their slimmest watch. It's their best GPS watch with dual band GPS features. So keep an eye out for that one. It's available now. It's only dropped a couple of days ago. It's a very sleek watch, and it's a very well lit screen and very easy to see. They're actually using some phone technology on these screens now to improve that quality there as well. So check out the Ignite 3. But some other big news from Polar Australia that's happening very, very soon. Obviously, today's date, we're dropping this episode on the 14th of November, Aussie time. But on the 21st of November through to the 28th of November, Polar Australia is having a very big sale. Check out their website. There'll be a link in our show notes, and you'll see some of those links on our socials in the coming days to prepare you to get onto that sale to help you save some money on these products that you will be using or should be using all the time. They've got up to 33% off their products with this sale, but specifically that might be of interest to us moto people is the Polar Grit X Pro. They're going to have 10% off it, which is one of their high-end multi-sport heart rate fitness watches. And they also have 20% off all H10 heart rate sensors, which is that chest strap. It's their highest quality one on their list, and they're going to have 20% off that specific heart rate sensor. So check out that sale. It's from the 21st of November through to the 28th of November, and the link, like I said, will be in the show notes. Please use our link. It will help support AlwaysMoto and show that they have made a good choice in supporting the AlwaysMoto podcast. So please use the link that we have available to get a purchase and update your fitness training apparatus and ensure that you're getting all the data you possibly can from that session that you're putting in all that effort into. We also have Slant Board, guys. Remember that one we talked about last week? We have a Slant Board affiliate deal with them where they are offering us a 10% discount for all Always Moto podcast listeners by using the Always Moto 10 code, which will be also linked in the show notes as well. It's a simple piece of equipment. It's a slant board. You can improve your squats so you can get a better range of motion in those squats or lunges or whatever else you can come up with to do on top of that board on that slant to help make your legs stronger improve your standing technique on the bike. And that code again is AlwaysMoto in lowercase at checkout. Again, link in the show notes, and you'll also help with us by following that link, not just Google searching people. Don't just Google search. Please use the link in the show notes so that we can get that credit as such for our sale through the site so that we can help keep having these guys on board with us to support the show. It's fantastic. We've got 2 people on board now supporting the Always Moto podcast that we've been talking about for a while now, and we're hoping to bring you some more in the coming weeks. We just got some few negotiations going on. Hopefully we can get some more companies that are very specific and products that I trust and I've used myself. I don't want to just bring you anybody onto this show and just take the money. I have to believe in them, and they have to be specific to moto or in the fitness and physical performance or injury prevention side of things. So we're looking forward to bringing on some extra people here shortly. As always, we've still got the Always Moto podcast merchandise. The t-shirts available. They're $25 plus postage and handling in Australian dollars. We have an international drop ship option available now. So we've got the US-based listeners can purchase that, and we'll get that through there. So the postage will be much cheaper now. Sorry for those listeners that had some higher priced postages back in the day, but we've sorted that out now. I've got an option to print them locally for you guys in the US. But hit us up, send us an email at alwaysmoto2019@gmail.com. Put t-shirt order in the subject line, and we'll send through those details for payment. We're doing payments via PayPal, and we'll organize delivery and all that sort of good stuff. Now, as the last thing here as well, before we jump into this interview, if you can support the show in any way, you can always send a donation to Always Moto PayPal account. Drop a message or a question in that notes. Any amount will do. There's a link in our bio on our Instagram or in our social feeds there, and also in the show notes to get to that Always Moto PayPal donation section. And we can then read out those questions live on the show. So please send us a donation. It will help keep the lights on here at the Always Moto podcast, which has been growing every episode, which is fantastic. And look, let's talk quickly about this interview. I really appreciate, I reached out to a lot of my contacts on social media to help support and promote this show. And I really appreciate the response that I've had from everybody that I've reached out to. Thank you for reposting that teaser video that I popped together a couple of days ago. Everyone who supported it, and now because of all those listeners that are now listening to this actual episode here as we're talking, I appreciate that that's been the case. And I really appreciate you supporting a small guy building his way into this industry here in this media game, and putting out this awesome podcast that we're trying to do for you guys and bring some different content that might not be necessarily asked in this light. Obviously, everyone's heard from Aldon Baker and other riders, but not necessarily in this light that we're looking at it from the fitness and industry side and injury side of things, not industry, injury side of things. So we're trying to bring you some different information. So hopefully you're enjoying it, but we really appreciate the support that everyone has given us. Now, on to the Aldon Baker interview. This was an awesome opportunity to sit down with Aldon. I asked him for 30 minutes to talk about his pre-season training program that he's currently putting his 5 riders through. Now, he's got Christian Craig as a newcomer. He's got Malcolm Stewart returning, Aaron Plessinger returning, Cooper Webb returning, as many of you have seen and heard about that little breakup and reuniting. And also continuing on with the program is RJ Hampshire. And they're the 5 guys specifically under Aldon. He obviously has the 250 program, which he's not directly responsible for, but run out of his Baker's factory property location there in Florida. But we wanted to get some information about what he does preseason. Now, like I said, I asked him for 30 minutes. By the time we had a few dropouts because there was a hurricane occurring in the area, so the weather over in Florida wasn't fantastic, and we'd gather the signal on his Wi-Fi, just kicked him off a couple of times. So bear with us towards the latter end of this interview. There's a couple of times he drops out, and we've had to sort of trim the audio to sort of match up so we could restart those conversations that we lost him for. So stick around for those bits, but he gets some really good stuff out. but he gave me way more than 30 minutes. It's almost an hour that he was on the phone for, and I really appreciate that because we dive into a few good topics here, not just in terms of, the basic stuff that's going on there, but, he's talking about some specific things with why he uses lactates as his measures for testing, why he uses body weights as well to prove a day's efforts, not just calories, which is a very simple measure. He's gone a bit more specific into that. And also how he adjusts his program and how he makes up time in his program for things that might happen that cause him to lose some effort periods along the way. So it's an extremely interesting interview. I had an absolute ball listening to him and getting to talk to him. It's probably a bit of a looking at your hero sort of thing. He's obviously been around for a long time, and we've known him for a long time in the industry of being the trainer to be with, and to actually get to sit down and talk to him was pretty cool. I've got to be honest, it was really cool. And we're hoping to be able to do some more things with Aldon over the next few months as the season progresses, and then their transition between Supercross and motocross and how that all works for them. And so trying to get some more info from him along the way. So there should be more stuff from him with AlwaysMoto in the near future, hopefully. So here's the interview, guys and girls, that you've all been waiting for. Appreciate you listening to the AlwaysMoto podcast. Don't forget to check out those sponsors of Polar Australia and Slantboard Guy, and also buy your t-shirt so you can rock that AlwaysMoto t-shirt at your next race event. But here's the interview with Aldon Baker. All right, joining us on the AlwaysMoto podcast today, it's a pretty special guest. He's one of the more well-known trainers in our industry, and probably, I would say, definitely the most winningest or successful trainer in our industry. He's from the Baker's Factory. It's Aldon Baker. Welcome onto the show, Aldon.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it, man, and appreciate the kind words.
No, look, I think you've earned that, to be honest. That's pretty much, you've been the one around probably the longest and definitely the most successful. And obviously now with this Baker's Factory program that you've got, it's a pretty impressive thing that to put your name to and be the face of. So, you deserve all the credit.
No, well, thank you. But as you know, in this sport, man, the results are everything. And obviously, yeah, man, it's been an amazing 22 years, and, definitely that's been incredible. But, man, we got to keep it going. So there's always a challenge ahead, man.
Yeah, exactly. It never ends, really, does it? There's always another race coming up. So,
right.
Well, let's jump into all this. We've got some questions here just to sort of talk about where you guys are up to with pre-season and what sort of goes into it for you guys. But I gather at this time of year, this is probably either the busiest and maybe the most critical part of your time with the guys as the trainer. Is that how you see this point in the year for you?
Yes, David, that's correct. I mean, for sure, it's the preseason, and it's, everything we can do to prep the guys before they go into racing. So for sure, the busiest and the most, what I call full on with the athletes, for sure.
Yeah, I like this is like with our season, the way it goes from race to race so quickly, there's not really time to rebuild anything from a physical, performance side of things. So this time of year, it's where all that hard effort goes into, isn't it, to be able to maintain that through the year then too?
Yeah, correct. And it's about the only time where we try and get the least amount of distractions, where the guys have to travel, and even that's a challenge. I mean, even this weekend, I've got Cooper's in Paris,
yep.
So there's still odd things that pop up, but I try and utilize the time that they're not having to travel or with, having a lot of commitments to try and get the most out of the preparation so that we're ready to go, the first week in January.
Yeah, definitely. So what is the sort of point that you try and start this preseason from? Like in our industry, obviously there's the contract changeovers for teams and all that sort of stuff happens around that 1st of October. But is that too early, or is that like sort of where you start to aim for this to begin from? Like I think you've started this program this year only sort of 2 weeks or so ago. Is that about what I saw online and stuff from the guys' socials?
Yep. Yeah, no, and look, typically it's the 1st of November when we do jump back into the training. When you look back, you always work after the last race, which is outdoors, and then the guys do need obviously a break. And then you've got to tie in also with when you can get all the equipment, the for Supercross. So you've got to be in line with when the teams can provide equipment for them, and then we've got to give them a certain amount of time to rebuild all these Supercross tracks. So, I have 3 of them, and they typically take about a week each to be built. So I'll start the 1st of October building tracks, and then, if all goes well, like it did, then after 3 weeks, we then jump into where we, start at least getting into some riding. But during that period, the guys have to go to California and still, start getting some of the new stuff, set up, and at least get their bikes pretty much to what they remember from the previous season, so that those things can be built and then be shipped out to the facility here in Florida. So there's a lot of little logistics that need to come together. So, you try and give the guys as much of a breather as possible before they dive back into it. And then you balance it out from there. But pretty much, 1st of October is when really things for Supercross start going, between the riders, the team, and then me prepping for the basically that 1st of November start.
Yeah, I think you just definitely answered that part about being the busiest too. Like obviously all that prep that you just talked about in terms of tracks and team changeovers and gear getting to the facility is busy. But you sort of went to something there too that I thought I might just ask about, is that gap between season and starting this. Is there a date, like a period of time that you like to see the guys have as a break dedicated, and then before they start jumping back into some I gather some maintenance cycling rides or anything like that before they get to that 1st November? Is there a couple of weeks? Like do you aim for 2 or 3? What's your number there?
David, it's pretty much 2, weeks that they can, and I wish it was more, but it just
you lose too much if it's longer.
Yeah, so they definitely get where, and I tell them, like take 2 weeks off where I don't, you don't, if they wanted to lay in bed for 2 weeks, they could do it if they wanted to. But normally the guys will, go on a holiday with their family or do something or regroup. And then after 2 weeks, we start getting back into cardio. And then you at least need those next 2 weeks of cardio before we start getting into riding again, but you don't want to go just cold into riding a motorcycle again. That's never the best. So, they off the motorcycle, the goal is to have 4 weeks, but really from training, it's only 2 weeks.
Yeah,
so it's not a lot.
No, it's not. They definitely don't get much time off in this sport compared to say others. They have a much longer break in like NFL or something. So yeah, it's a bit of a quick turnaround. But so then obviously this phase starts. If you start that training, 1st of November, say like you just indicated, how long there's an intense phase for this preseason. How long is that for you before you then would say hit that taper into round 1?
So the goal is I try and utilize basically the November and all of December. But when you put in the holidays, it's that adjusts things anyway, like Christmas Day, New Year. So when I look at it, I'll only get probably 6 weeks total of solid training. The other little pieces really is you lost with holidays, which you don't get around, and then also the odd weather delay, and I'll give you an example. In early December, they're all got to be in California for what they call Felt Media Day, where they get all their pictures ready for that, so they go missing a little bit there. So when you incorporate all the days that they're not able to actually put in training, then you lose a certain amount. So I look at the schedule, and then I look at the plan with what I have available. But overall, to answer your question, it's probably a good 6 weeks. That's it in preparation before you start tapering off and leading up to the first race, which that is typically right around just after Christmas anyway. And they make that transition after then anyway towards California. So
yeah, so they'd be all moving out there then, wouldn't they? Like it's a bit of a busy week, that first week of January, I gather. So
exactly, and then they've got to run in their race bikes and all that. So that whole system, is definitely a lot more mellow. So it's almost like a natural taper, because it's not like you could do much more with it anyway.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you're forced into that situation. So yeah.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, what about like this? You've obviously been doing this for quite some time now, and you said, I think before we hit record, was about 22 years that you've been in this industry doing training for pro riders. Is this preseason look anything like the preseason in terms of what you're writing out for a program as that you did at that very first time back with Ricky Carmichael all those years ago?
Yeah, no, it's evolved a lot since Ricky. I mean, just the racing and the overall training is evolved a lot. The biggest thing that I've seen is the difference with I've got putting good guys together. So if I give an example, when I started with Ricky back in the day, it was more very individual.
Yep.
And everyone trained alone. So it was really, you could actually almost push a lot more and add a lot more load because they weren't getting pushed automatically like I see the group now. So lately, since I've been able to put good guys together, there's no way I think they could cope with the load that I used to have. But so it kind of condenses a little bit, but the intensity is a lot better, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. So, all right. So you're saying that like the overall, like maybe no, all good. A couple of technical difficulties there, guys and girls. But yeah, Aldon's back on the line. So he was just going through that the load and the intensity is probably the different point of the program this year than say 22 years ago. But so you're basically saying that this time around for the guys that are on the program, Cooper, Aaron, Christian, Malcolm, those guys, that they're doing less, maybe say in the gym or less miles on the bike, but they're probably just more intense on the track, on the actual moto. Is that what you're sort of getting at there with the training program?
Yeah, David, I mean, everything is obviously all in, you line everything towards the riding, and your riding fitness and your riding intensity. So, it is good to see now that you're able to put, good guys together. You can gain those, I'd say, get those gains a little bit easier than if the guy was all on his own.
Okay.
So but that's where it starts. I always, on the program, I always look at, I've got to get to at least where I know they're capable of a really high intensity for at least 2 solid motos, which is, I weighed up as basically 22 minutes.
Yep.
So that's what you want to aim for in the training is like, okay, if I can get the guys at a high end and good speed and great consistency for that amount of laps, then we're pretty much looking good. So the goal is to head towards that. The cycling, the running, the other cardio workouts, rowing, ski erg, all the other little pieces, all are just links to help balance that out,
Help them achieve that consistency of the cardio over the 22 minutes.
Exactly. And then if you have kind of like today, we had a bit of a delay because of some rough weather, then I've got to adjust the intensity, which I'm trying to get out of cardio instead of, because I know I would have missed it from the motorcycle stuff. So you're constantly balancing, but the plan is ultimately to get towards that, the riders being able to maintain at least that so that they can go racing,
Yeah, and so I'm guessing what I'm hearing then today, they probably were all moaning and groaning that they're having to put in more effort on a cardio machine rather than the motorcycle.
Yes, yeah. So because these guys are racers, they motorcycle guys, so it's not like they just love the cardio part,
No.
That just balances out the training that we need in order to gain that fitness. And then when you add the strength stuff, the strength training is kind of individual because each guy's a little bit different in their strengths and weaknesses. So although I have to try and do, the strength training as a group, but I will balance out that training with areas that I feel like obviously that all of them need, but then there are specifics for guys that maybe have a little bit of a weakness in certain areas where they'll be doing a little bit extra in those kind of areas. So that just adds that other little piece that you've got to make sure you are monitoring and adjusting accordingly.
Yeah, I think I had that a question a bit later on for us, but I'll jump in it now because you sort of touched on it. But like, you've got a couple of guys that are obviously a different stature, Malcolm to like Cooper, like they're two different people physically to look at height wise, bone structure, muscle mass, and obviously then going to adapt to those strength sessions very differently. And potentially, put on a lot of bulk or none, So do your programs for those guys, because you've got like, I think it's 5, isn't it, this year that you got working with you?
Yeah.
Are your strength programs like essentially the same, just different, like, so same exercise, say, like you're all going to do, just first top off my head, chest press, say, right? We're all doing chest press today, but Malcolm's going to do a higher weight with more reps, and Cooper's going to do a smaller weight, a higher weight, more reps, and so on and so forth to target those different physical body types, or what do you do at that point for those variances that you're trying to work around?
Yeah, and that's a good question, David. But it starts with, so when I start with an athlete, so I obviously take measurements, see where he's at, see where his mobility is, see if he has any areas that, from injuries, what he's capable and all that. So I have a pretty decent idea where everybody is at. But the biggest thing too, and you're right, is that each guy has a different structure. And like a guy like Malcolm, and even Coop, we constantly having to watch, weight gains, that they don't, that's a tough one. I mean, it's very individual, but it is what it is. So, getting bulk in the gym is not going to help me at all, especially with those guys. So with them, I'm not a believer actually across the field of being on such heavy weight. I'd rather change their workouts, like specifically with them, to a lot lighter weight, more repetitions. So we're still getting that, what I call fatigue training, which is good for them on the motorcycle, but also will utilize a lot more combination workouts where they're doing more of a motion. So it also adds a little bit of that cardio side, so that they're actually burning a bit of calories too. And then I'm also a big believer in band workouts, because I feel like you can't damage anything with bands, but you can't really make massive muscle gain. But it is fatiguing, and it is great for keeping the specific areas strong, and also mainly to prevent against injury. I feel like the gym stuff is more of a injury prevention scenario than anything else, to be honest, unless a guy has a massive weakness. But typically, by the time I get down the line, and we're in the later in 450 class, it's not like that's their first ever strength training workout or whatever. They pretty much have done a decent amount. Yeah, exactly. So they've pretty much come to you with all having done different sort of scenarios or exercises, and then I've got to kind of navigate through that and find out, depending on what I see with weaknesses and strengths, and adjust accordingly. And then the other big thing is, I do have to keep them as a group. We don't have enough time in the day where I could individually do each guy in the gym. So I've got to be mindful of that, on how creative I get in the gym, which, to give an example, I change the gym. It changes every week.
Right.
So
you
it's
do
not
make
the
that bigger
same
differences all the time.
Yeah. No, I find that that's critical, because then I can kind of rally through multiple different exercises that, maybe this week it's not perfect for Malcolm, but it's still, he's going to get something out of it, but it may be aligned for more, let's say, Coop. And then, I'll keep in mind that, okay, Coop's going to miss a session going off to Paris this week. So then then it'll be switching to where it sort of favors more like a Christian or a Malcolm in a way. But an adjustment of weight is very individual. And the way I work through that without getting complicated is, the guys have got to meet their certain reps. And if it's slightly lighter, let's say or it's maybe a little bit under, or give you an example, let's say Malcolm can do this exercise specific, like a squat, a little easier than, what Aaron can do, then, Malcolm will do more repetitions.
Okay.
So it balances, and that's probably the best because, like I said, it's never perfect when you do have a group. There's huge benefits to having a group, and that's why I feel like they push each other. The
Yeah.
training's a little bit more fun. The longevity out of everything I feel is really good, but there are areas where you just have to give up a little.
Yeah, fair enough. And too, like there's only so many things you can do for a group of 5. So, and in a short space of
Yeah.
time when you're trying to make the best for everyone. So yeah, that would be difficult on different days to come up with the right mix. So, I don't envy that part of your
Exactly.
job at all. That would be the challenge to make sure they're all engaged and enjoying it and progressing. So yeah, that'd be difficult.
Yeah, no, that's why I say, like, I've got my hands full when I have 5 guys. It's everything I have to monitor all of this, and at least know that I'm making the gains that we need to make.
Definitely. So on those gains and sort of on that weight sort of talk there about, getting specific for the right rider at the right time with the weights, when you do start out these programs, and you sort of touched on it before about testing them for, previous injuries and range of motions, is that day one for you at this point in the preseason, like to do like a testing day, and then what do you do test for at that point? Like, is there a couple of specific tests you would use and then reuse to say at the end of the 6-week preseason test to say, yes, we achieved this bit, we've got to this point that we wanted you at, to be hopefully competitive, come round 1.
Yeah, and David, that's a good question. I mean, I try and get as much information in the beginning. I know before we start training, they're fresh. Everything is pretty much ground zero in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little bit different to a new guy, like in the case with Christian, because I have no information on him.
Yeah.
So I'll want to run a little bit more, and that's including the standard preseason blood testing to get a base to understand where they are in a rested point. Because it's difficult down the line to do blood tests when you're in training. You're going to get a lot of false sort of scenarios with that. But at least preseason, it's to make sure that we've got the base blood work, and then I'm more into the lactate testing. To see what a rider's capabilities are. I'm not a big believer in VO2 because I feel like it doesn't align or it's not needed for motorcycle racing. Now, if they were a cyclist or a runner or a swimmer, I'd say that is huge because that's going to show their capability cardio-wise, but not for motorcycle racing. I feel like that's unnecessary, and I can get better values that are more specific to each guy with lactate testing. So
fair enough.
I'm a big believer of that. And there again, like in the case of like a new guy like Christian, you get that, but that's all you have. So that's your base settings. That is something that you would want to check again. But to me, it's not critical because you ain't got any choices. So when you get to the end and they're going to go racing, it's in a way, it could be detrimental mentally if you run another test and that's maybe not the ideal test.
Okay.
Because so I kind of pick my battles with that. And if I find that we have a situation where there's a day where, there's no riding or it fits in and I know they're fresh in that, then I might throw that test back at them. But it's not ideal, I feel, because really, if for some reason, I feel like you're definitely you're going to make improvements just on just looking at the program. When you've built up more and more and more intensity and laps, it's going to get better. I've never had a guy go backwards, to be honest. But you've also got to watch that you don't want the mentality to change. He's got to go racing no matter what. Even if he's not ready, it's not like you can call and say, hey, can you guys move the schedule? This guy ain't ready.
That'd be an interesting phone call.
It's going to happen. Yeah, and that's something, it's funny because sometimes we laugh when I first watched them in the first week of riding, and I'm like, dang it, man, maybe we need to get that schedule changed to like February, and they all start laughing, like, anyway. But, my point is that you also want to be realistic at what they have to go and do. It's not like there's any choices. So you got to watch that a little bit. But typically, seeing improvements is something I want to see on the motorcycle, and I do have what I call consistency ratios on how consistent they are lap by lap, and also how much they can take or load-wise on a motorcycle. That's always your two major sort of guidelines. The rest, I mean, even the cycling and the cardio, that improves anyway, because you're doing a lot more of it, and it's becomes part of it. So
you make an interesting point there about that, the psychology part about not retesting right before, because it might break the person before their season starts. Like, I hadn't thought of that, because like I suppose in moto they are a bit fragile in the sense of the psychology, and this guy's beating me and I can't get him on this lap, or he's beating me in the gym everywhere. I don't want to know that he's massively better than me physically before I go and try and race him for the money. I hadn't thought of that point. It's really, you're bang on.
Well, it's true, David, and that's why I know in earlier when you're some of the things that I read, I think one of the things we were going to chat about was having like a PR record for like rowing or something. You know what I mean? Which you honestly don't want that, because you're going to get certain athletes that just gravitate that they'll love the rower, or another guy's a great, just automatically better cyclist than another one. So you got to be careful that you don't want to show that, oh, wow, this guy just blew the socks off that, but not everyone can do it. Because now you're like, dang it, he's not going to deal with this too well. Because they're all competitive guys and they're racers, So it's bad enough per se that every guy will have their bad days on the track, and how you navigate that is also important. But I kind of sit down with the group also before we all start training and get them to understand that not every day is going to be a good day for any one of them. And also, some guys gravitate better to a particular track than others. And, we have 3 supercross tracks. So I do find, so I think with them knowing that, what, the goal here is to use each other to be better and to be pushed. That's going to make each of us better. But then obviously when we go racing, it's all into what we do on race day, and that's our racecraft, and pretty much, what you do from the start, to the end of the race.
Yeah, definitely. Like, because I was just thinking as you're talking about all that, like that they're obviously knowing the lap times when they're on the track for the days, and that's probably enough of the beat down than having in the gym. Yeah, all right, 2K on the rower, I'm 5th out of 5.
Yeah.
Like that would be probably hard enough. It's hard enough knowing that you're 5th out of 5 on the track that day, let alone going into the gym later in the afternoon or whatever. And there it is too. Oh crap, I'm terrible. They wouldn't need to know that. Do they watch, like I've seen some of you. Some of the videos and stuff on you guys in the past with like having some heart rate data sort of on screens and stuff. Are you still doing that sort of thing? Because I assume then with the 5 guys, they'd be monitoring their heart rates over different activities that they're doing as well, and going, oh,